Well, hello there, and welcome to this video. My name is Matt Petrowski. I'm a FileMaker developer, love working in FileMaker. I'm guessing you tuned in this video because you'd like to learn more about FileMaker, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to take a look at some button tricks. Hang with me, we'll be on my desktop in just a few. All right, so what is it we're talking about? We're going to just be taking a look at some basic button tricks. These are the things that you can add to your database in order to give your database that extra bit of flair. Now, there's no file that we're following along if you've been following my other series here on YouTube. In fact, if you'd like to, you can always check out the other videos that I've got by clicking on the channel icon. You'll find that down below. Otherwise, let's hop into a FileMaker file. Now, I'm using a copy of FileMaker 16 as I shoot this, and I'm just going to go up here and I'm going to choose to create a new solution. As I do that, I'll get a prompt that for me comes up off screen, but that's all right. We'll move it here on screen, and I'm just going to call this buttons, which you can call your solution, whatever you'd like to call it. FileMaker is going to come up with our dialog. I'll, of course, cancel that with the escape key. And here what we're talking about with regards to buttons are things that you can take advantage of in order to give the buttons a little bit of extra flair, I guess I should say. And that's basically when you hover over buttons or when you press buttons, things where the button shows or indicates that you've done something. Now, FileMaker has button states. You should know about these things. I have the inspector shown right here, as I'm going to select this button. If the inspector is not showing, you can access that with either Command or Control I. So as I hit Command or Control I, I'm hitting Command I here on the Macintosh, that comes up for me to be able to see. I also don't like, on new files, I don't like working in the default, which will default to whatever measurement system is for your particular locale. For here in the US, it's going to inches, otherwise you might be in centimeters, but points is what we always like to design in here in FileMaker. Now, we have two options here in FileMaker 16. We can choose a button or we can choose a button bar. Now, the button bar shows that it has 3 segments, but we're never limited to just the 3 segments. We, of course, can have as many as we want. And one of the things that I do by default is I tend to choose the button bar these days in FileMaker 16 instead of the button, because the button bar is an advancement or an enhancement of FileMaker's standby button tool. It just has a little bit more in terms of features. Primarily this option right here, we can use a calculated result for the label that's on the button, and that gives us a lot of power. So by clicking -2 times here, I turn this 3-segment button bar into a single segment, and I can now start to play with my button. Now, the interesting thing here is, with buttons, you always have to decide how much or how far you go with regards to indicating states on an object, in particular a button. We're going to select this third area in the Inspector tab called the Appearance, and here's where we have full control over whatever we want to do with the button. Now, let's give the button, I'll double-click the button. We need to give it a name, and I'm just going to call it Button for right now. But we will see why this is, the ability to change the value. We can't do it based on a state, but the ability to change a value on a button does allow us to do a little bit more extra after we've played with the states. Let's play with the states of these objects. Now, the button bar by default in this theme, because each theme will control differently how an object will look, but in this theme, it starts off with a nice black color on pretty much all of the states. Now, what are the states? The states are these items right here, where we have the different states of active, inactive, hover, pressed, and in focus. Now, in previous videos or other videos that I have here on YouTube, I've shown how to go through this process, but I'm going to give you the key tip that you need to know when you're going to start with a fresh button with regards to the style. If you don't want to use FileMaker style and you want to throw that out, or the style that comes with the theme, speaking of which, let's take a quick take a look at this. If you are interested in themes, I can save you a lot of time. Just check out this.
This video has been brought to you by FileMakerThemes.com. It's a one-stop shop for choosing a theme to apply to your new or existing FileMaker solution. When considering your next move toward advancing the look and feel of your FileMaker solution, don't forget to visit FileMakerThemes.com.
So if you head over there, you can save a lot of time with themes, especially with regards to colors. But back to that button. So here's the trick. I'm going to set this button with all of its settings. Now, the one thing we have to know, let me zoom in here so we can see the button. The one thing that a button, where it's different than a button bar, is that the button bar has two different outlines. The first is the outline of the button bar as a whole. So as I selected off that object, the first time that I click, the line settings that we find right here, these are the line settings that would apply to what surrounds all of the segments in a button bar. But if we're editing the button bar as a single button, we have to know that there is first that outer line. So we have the solid line right here, which we will turn on. Now the line won't appear until we give it an actual thickness. I'll set it to 1, and an actual color. It was transparent, so we'll set it to blue right now. So that blue outer line is our first line. Then if we select the segment itself is a second opportunity to have a line. Now, we do not get to control the state of the outer line of a button bar segment. The inner line only is affected based on the states that we have. That's the states that we have right here, active, inactive, what have you. So let's set that one as well. We'll set that one to solid, and now let's set it to, I don't know, a randomly different color, just so we can see what's going on. So we've got the outer line of the button bar itself. Then we've got the outer line of the button segment itself. Then there is, in terms of the CSS, underneath the hood, a third line. There may actually be two other lines. It's an inner border, but we don't have access to that here in the inspector. We can't control it. If we hacked FileMaker, or hacked, I shouldn't say hack FileMaker, if we hacked this button, we would be able to control it, but that's well beyond the scope of what we got here. So here's what I'm going to show you in terms of the trick. This inner line, this inner segment, we have control over it when we have various states. And I almost bypassed over the tip that I was going to give you. This object, I'm going to turn off that line. Well, actually, I'll leave the line on for right now. I'm going to leave the line on. I'm going to set it to be transparent, meaning I want the line to be there, but I'm going to want to do different things based on the different states with a transparent line in order to simulate the effect of movement. So this is the trick that I'm talking about. Now, just before we do that, the trick that we need to know about, which unfortunately doesn't work on button bars, on button bar segments. I'm seeing that right here because my trick is normally this. With a regular FileMaker button, once I have that button pretty much set up how I want, and I wish this is just a byproduct of the fact that FileMaker just hasn't had the time to put all of the same features in all of the same places because of this. So let's say we've got our button right here. It's set to everything that we like. We'll add we've got let's make the line a blue line right there. So this is the starting point that I would like to work with. The easiest thing to do is to capture this state, which is currently for this button, the normal state, and simply use this eyedropper right here to suck up the normal state and then switch to all of the other states. So I go to hover and I paste, and I go to pressed and I go paste. Well, this is, basically apply that style. So what I'm doing in essence is to this button, I'm resetting the button so that all states have the exact same style settings. That makes it easy because now what we can do is we can select and say, okay, for the on focus state, or on the hover state, I want to do something different. So let's go down now. We'll hide the graphic. We'll go to the text and we'll do something where on hover, we get the effect of a bolding of the text. So this is pretty standard. I'll say that I want to save. When I hover this over this object, of course, here's a trick. Or not a trick, here's something you have to know. Right now, I'm attempting to hover over this, and I set the hover state to go to bold. But the trick here is FileMaker is not going to show any of your states if a button is not assigned to do something. So this can be a hang up for if you're new with FileMaker and you go in, you make those settings and you're like, why is this not turning bold? I told it to go bold when I go hover. That is because of this. If the button is not assigned to do anything, and currently this button is assigned to do nothing. So we need to assign it to a bare minimum of a step or a script. So I'm going to choose to perform a single step here, and I will just put into this. The easiest when you're just defining a button and you really don't want it to do anything is to basically say set variable and set it to nothing. That at least tells FileMaker, hey, I want you to do something. And in fact, what I want you to do is nothing. So we go into browse mode, and this should now, we get our hover state. So that's pretty obvious. But what if we want to keep the text the same and we just want it to move? Well, that's going to be a little bit different, where I'll work with this button, but we'll also do it with the button bar with the segment. Reason being, remember, we have 2 lines available to us on a button bar, where on a button we only have 1 line. So with this knowledge, we can do some really creative things, but let's do it on the basic button first. So on this button, what I'm going to do is expose the graphic here. I'm going to turn off the line in this particular case. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to the hover state. Now this is, of course, this will only work for a button where you don't want a line if you're going to use this particular trick on buttons, not button bars. We have a little bit different approach here. So for the hover state, currently, let's say we did not want that text to go bold. We want the text to stay the same, but we want to simulate the hover, what it looks like if with the button was going to get a press. Well, this is cool because on the hover, what we can do is we can set the line to be a solid line, but we now set the line to be transparent. Now with a 1 pixel width on this, it'll be very subtle, but of course we can exaggerate this. So if we go into browse mode now, notice that when I hover, we get that very subtle drop down, or that effect that the button is going and being depressed, which is really pretty cool. So let's extend this a little bit more. We'll go to the button, and there's one thing that we have here in the advanced graphic, and it's this outer shadow and the inner shadow. Now the first thing that I'm going to mention to you is if you're going to use the inner shadow trick, it really will only work either on Macintosh or on Windows. It will not work in FileMaker Go on iOS because we don't have a hover state. But even if you wanted to use it for the pressed state, which would be really nice when you're on a mobile device, you press on the button, it makes the button go down, you use the line, you make the transparent line, make it look like it pushes the text down, which makes the button look like it's depressed. That would be great, and it works with the line, but it doesn't work with the inner shadow. And that's because FileMaker is not rendering these shadows on FileMaker Go within mobile, which is a bummer. And it's mostly because it's really costly if they had to do it for, let's say you had inner shadow on all of your different objects. Maybe in the future they'll change that, but as far as I know, this inner shadow trick will only work on either of your computing platforms, Mac, Windows. Spit it out, Matt. Say what you're trying to say. So on our horizontal offset, let's make sure that we're on our correct state. So we need to go to our hover state, and we want to turn on the inner shadow for the hover state. And we are going to give this maybe a subtle opacity of 20, and we are going to give it a blur of, say, 3, and we are going to use a vertical offset right there of a few. And let's just give it a little bit less. Really subtle little trick right there. All right, so now let's go take a look at what that looks like. We go into browse mode, and we hover, and we get that really nice hover effect that the button's going, it's going down. And it's going down because of the shadow and also because of the line that's shifting it down. Want to exaggerate that even more? Simply select your button, go to your hover state, and then increase the width of your line to 3 points. Now the difficulty that we come across once we go past 1 point width, or 1 pixel width, is very hard to discern. It really shows you that effect, but I want you to recognize what's happening when I go from 1 to 3 and we go into browse mode. Notice that while we get that effect, what's actually happening is it looks like the button itself is shrinking. And there's a reason for that when we take a look at how lines affect the rest of what's on the inside of a button. It works really good with one point because it's subtle, but with this selected and going to the hover state, if we were to turn on the solid for all of the lines and turn this on to a really thick line and zoom in on this, we can take a look at the way that the line works is that the line consumes space from the outer edge of the button in. So that means it's going to eat up space, taking it away from the inside of the object, which is a little bit of a downside if you want to go with a really thick line. But there are some tricks that you can do with that in order to accomplish it. So now let's take a look at, and of course, you can do this not just on this button and not when you're shifting the text of a button down. Think about a horizontal or a sidebar. Let's get a button bar in here and let's make it vertical. So let's think about this as a trick in terms of these. So let's say we've got a button bar where we are going to have 1, 2, let's spell 2 correctly, and then 3. And then we will go into our alignment here, and oops, a little zoomed in a little too much, but I can back that off. All right, we will align these. Where's my alignment here? I think it's there, right there. So we'll go to the left. We'll go back to our advanced padding. So now we'll just give it some padding. We'll make it come off of that edge right there. And let's see what happens. Let's change the hover on one of the segments here. And where we're using the line, let's use the line again here and try this one. So we will make a solid line. We are going to turn off put all the lines on. We're going to turn off that. We just want just the left edge of the line. We want it to be solid, and we of course want it to be 5 points. Now I would have to, here's the trick, we can solve this. Let's make it actually more exaggerated, like 10 points for the hover state. So what we've done is on the segment itself, just like we did with this button where we're using the line on the top to shift things down, we can use the line on the left in order to shift things in either direction. The difficulty that we have here with the button bar is you notice the button bar, remember we've got two settings, the outer of the button bar itself and then the segment. Right now we have the segment selected, which is indicated by the black line. We deselect that so that we don't have a segment selected. Now we select the whole of the button bar, and darn it, I thought we could give it a fill, but unfortunately we cannot. FileMaker's not letting us do that, so we have to do workaround pro time, which is this right here. I would get an object, I would select and make that object black for the background. I would select both of these objects. I would go to my position tab. I would now resize that to the largest width and the largest height. I will then realign these and put them both on their left edge and then both on their top edge. I will select the background color that I've added. I will now choose to send that to the background, which I can choose right here to send it all the way to the back, so that when I go into browse mode and I hover over these, again, here's my problem. Why is it not hovering? Why is it not showing me my hover? Because there's nothing assigned to the button. Okay, fine, FileMaker. We will assign the button to a set variable of nothing, and we'll say okay, and that should now, at least for that button, work. So that, there we go, we get that trick. So I do need a little bit of a fix right there. That would be setting the border on this object, which is currently gray, to a black color so that everything matches up. So we'll select those and we will align them to their lefts and align them to the top. And now we've sort of got our fake, look at that, isn't that cool? With regards to motion and being able to use these styles, you know, as I hover down each of these, those could pop out, and you can do all kinds of little tricks. If I wanted that to be a strong border, let's take a look at what that would look like. I think you get the idea on this. So we're working with our hover state, and let's say that instead of just using a transparent line for the purpose of shifting text, we used a line that gives us a nice indication, which is even more indication that oh, okay, that's the button that you're going to hit. So these are the really cool tricks that you can take advantage of. And just before we wrap this up using these transparent lines, I want to go back to this button object right here and remind you that if I'm going to take advantage of the two borders that I have now, and if I'm only going to use a single segment, I can treat the outer border of the button bar as my defining boundary, but I can now use the inner border in order to get that button text to shift. Where with this object, I can't do that because I don't have dual borders. But with a single segment button bar, I do. All I have to do is select that segment after I've given the whole of the button a border, and just choose my hover state. And on my hover state, I'm going to make that that fill none again, but I have my object already selected here. I'm going to turn off all borders, turn on my top border, and I will shift it even more. Exactly what I was trying to accomplish here, but I can shift it as much as I want. And because the outer border is on the whole of the button bar, FileMaker, it doesn't consume the space that we saw that happens with our normal button. So here again is another reason why here in FileMaker 16 and moving forward, in fact, FileMaker 15 and forward, I almost never choose the button tool anymore. It's always single segment buttons because of this particular feature. So on the hover, we've got our shift for 3. So now I believe we'll have to assign this because it's set to do nothing. We will set our variable and we'll say okay, and voila, we get our shift of our button simulating any presses. And of course, I can add that shadow that we already took a look at here that gives us the nice effect of the extra shadow, at least on hover and pressed. And we get some really cool button effects of some movement. And that's my video for today. That's my suggestion of how to use buttons. So there's our 20 minutes of FileMaker learning. We can switch over, see if we've got any comments that came in or any feedback, any questions. If you've got one that you can go ahead and ask that. Let's see, count of FileMaker button tricks. There are a lot of them, but hopefully this is a good one. We did get a question that came in. How to find out which objects I've applied a theme and which are not within the theme. Let's see, how can I find out which objects have applied themes and which ones are not with an applied theme? I'm going to assume that what you mean is an applied style, because it's really not possible for an object to not be within a given theme. So for example, the theme on this file, and any new FileMaker file that you create, will be FileMaker's Enlightened theme, or at least as of FileMaker 16, it may be 14, 15, etc. Maybe they'll change it in future versions if you're watching this. But in this particular theme, which is applied on a layout by layout basis, you cannot have a button that does not have, at the bare minimum, the default style. And then beyond that, you will note whether there is a style that has been applied to that object. And that is simply a matter of selecting the object, going to the style area, and then looking at what the selection is. Now, every object for any theme that's applied to a layout will be either default or some other custom name. So in this case, the default that I have just modified, which we can see by the very fact that we have this red triangle, means that the default of a button bar object has been changed. And if I wanted to update all other button bars that are set to the default, meaning I just clicked here and I dragged them out, they assumed the default, everything has to have a default initial. If I did this and said save changes to current style, that means all other button bars would get these changes. If I didn't want to do that, then I would have to choose this option of save as new style. And so typically that's what I would do. I would save this as a new style, and I'll call this button with impact because it's a button. Or I'll call this something like shifting button. There you go. That may be a little bit better. So I have now added a new style to my theme. So really, in order to see what style an object has, all you have to do is within this area, the styles is just select a button and see what is the state of that button. What style does it have? And if it does have a style, has it been modified? So I can see that here. It has the default style, but I can see that it's been modified. So if I wanted to switch this back to what the default is, I would just choose revert changes to style. But of course, that would take off my shifting line. It would take off the green line that's currently on this, what have you. And if I want to completely change this style, as soon as I click one of these, it will wipe out the changes that I have applied to this default style. So unless I save as a new style, if I choose any of one of these other options, it will change all of the it will take away all of the changes that I had made. So I click here and that's it. All of those settings that I took the time to make of the transparent line, then making it green, putting on the shadow, they are gone. I do not have them back. What I would have needed to do was what I did with the button here, was select on that triangle and choose the Save as New Style. That's how I accumulate and save new styles once I've made changes to default objects. So I hope that helps you out, Arturo, with that question. And let's see if anything else came in. All right. Can you do the movie theater button? Not exactly sure what you're asking me there, Hermund. The choosing of the chairs in the movie theater. You'll have to explain that one to me a little bit later. Let's see. We've got another question that came in, and I'm only being short with Hermund because I know him personally. Question, can we change the portal buttons the same way for normal buttons? Yes, a button in FileMaker, in terms of an object, there are only two. They are the button or the button bar. So regardless of whether you put them inside of a portal or outside of a portal, it's still a button object. So wherever that button resides, outside, inside a portal, it doesn't matter. Segue. Don't know. Too bad. Segue, or go to related records. All right, so we've got a lot of comments here, and I think that's going to give us a wrap here. FM Perception will tell you which objects are what. I don't know if it, I think it may, because each object does track its own style, or it knows its own style, so FM Perception should be able to pull that out. For those of you not in the know, FM Perception is a wonderful analysis tool for finding out things about your FileMaker database. So I think that's going to give us a wrap for today. So we will wind it up and just talk about FileMaker another day. I hope this has given you more insight into FileMaker, and as always, I'm going to wish you much luck. But before I do that, you can subscribe here. Otherwise, the next video will come up right here. And until next time, much luck to you with your FileMaker development, and happy FileMaking. See you later.